I see. Before I start, I would like to thank you once again for the invitation to come to Laval and your great hospitality. Merci beaucoup pour l'hospitalité et je m'excuse de parler en anglais. The topic of city foundations that I will tackle today might at first sight appear to be a purely historical one. Certainly, Philip II of Macedon or Alexander the Great were important founders of cities. Also in medieval and early modern times, one finds a wide range of newly founded cities across the globe. But especially nowadays, in some parts of the world, city foundations become more and more relevant again. In China, for example, approximately 100 kilometers south of Beijing, the city Chong'an is being built. According to the Chinese government, this new city shall relieve the capital of non-essential functions and reduce its population, while also creating an innovation hub for the surrounding region. In northwestern Saudi Arabia, along the Red Sea coastline, the city of Neom has been founded, a futuristic city that shall serve as a tourist destination. Finally, in Egypt, a new administrative capital in the vicinity of Cairo is still under construction that shall house the buildings for the administration and the apartments for high officials and diplomats. All three examples, to which one could add several other building projects from countries like Malaysia or Indonesia, show the relevance of city foundations up to this day. For this reason, the historical examination of city foundations remains relevant, as it can provide us with information about the motives, organization, and problems of city foundations from an historical perspective. I would like to face one of such foundations today and take a closer look at the city of Antinoopolis in Middle Egypt, located on the eastern bank of the Nile and first described by the explorers that followed Napoleon on his military campaign to Egypt in 1798. While their impression of the city is slowly fading away, it can still be traced in parts by the often still untouched settlement area today. So here, a picture of the Description de l'Égypte, and here's some impressions of how it looks nowadays. Antinoopolis, founded in 130 AD, is in many ways still puzzling for modern interpreters. While questions arise on the one hand about the practical organization of this foundation, for example, why it was founded or how it could survive as a self-sufficient settlement, questions about the very nature of the appearance of the city and its inhabitants come up on the other. The Emperor Hadrian gave its civic community the title of Neoi Hellenes, New Greeks. With this wording, the city appears as entirely Greek, which still has an impact on modern interpreters. Thus, the city is regarded as a bulwark, a bastion, or a promoter of Hellenism in the region. But what does such a wording imply? In the following 30 minutes, I would like to discuss these and other questions in more detail. We will start by taking a look at the foundation of Antinoopolis and the problems of its location, its settlers, and their motivation to become citizens of the newly founded community. We will then consider what impact Antinoopolis had on the Egyptian Shura before we face its interrelation with other cities of the province that considered themselves equally as Greek polis. In 130 AD, while the Roman Emperor Hadrian was on his second great journey through the empire, he also visited Egypt. After his arrival during the summer, he decided to go on a Nile cruise with his entourage when something tragic happened. The author of the Historia Augusta, a collection of biographies of emperors of the 2nd and 3rd centuries, narrates, "During a journey on the Nile, he lost Antinous, his favorite, and for this youth he wept like a lamenting woman. Concerning this incident, there are varying rumors. For some claim that he devoted himself to death for Hadrian, and others, what both his beauty and Hadrian's sensuality suggest. But however this may be, the Greeks deified him at Hadrian's request and declared that oracles were given through his agency, but these, it is commonly asserted, were composed by Hadrian himself." According to this testimony, the foundation of Antinoopolis is connected with the death of Antinous. a young man from Bithynia to whom Hadrian had evidently become attached. As the historian Augusta tells us, already in antiquity, the death of Antinous gave rise to many speculations and bears eloquent witness to the attempts to gain control over the interpretation of the incident. Hadrian, for example, justified the death in his autobiography as an accident, as we know from the historiographer Cassius Dio, while on the other hand, rumors circulated that Antinous had sacrificed himself either voluntarily or even at the ruler's pressure. The only thing that is indisputable in this context is the choice of Antinous as the patron for the construction of the new polis in Middle Egypt, which thus appears, at least allegedly, as a commemorative foundation in honor of Antinous, as Cassius Dio puts it. He claims that Antinoopolis was founded at the very spot where Hadrian's young companion had drowned in the Nile, which is in the immediate vicinity of the town of Hermopolis, the capital of the 15th Upper Egyptian nome and focal point of the cult of Thoth. Dio's emphasis on the interrelation between the death spot of Antinous and the location of the new city is accepted by many modern interpreters and may very well explain the choice of the eastern bank of the Nile, where fertile land for agriculture was scarce and did not allow settlement on the same scale as on the western bank. However, certain other reasons speak for a less spontaneous decision to found Antinoopolis on the very spot where the ancient ruins are nowadays located. As the largest nome, that means administrational district in Middle Egypt, the area of Hermopolis not only offered sufficient space for a new settlement, it also occupied a strategically important key position in relation to the occasionally turbulent Thebaid to the south and, to that point, lacked a direct center of power for the new rulers. Antinoopolis was only the fourth polis to be founded in all of Egypt. Hence, in the Nile Delta we have now Crotis, built as early as the 6th century BC, and the polis of Alexandria, founded by Alexander the Great. Inland was Ptolemais Hermiou, laid out by Ptolemy the First. A look at the map thus reveals Antinoopolis as the only polis of Middle Egypt and one of only two polis located in inland Egypt. However, the administrative centers of Middle Egypt and the Thebaid in the 2nd century were Ptolemais and Memphis, which both basically only had a peripheral coverage to the region of Hermopolis. This area was therefore somehow still a blind spot in the complete control of the province. Hence, there was no administrative center or a particular visibility of the ruling regime here. The presence of the central administration was thus mandatory in this region, and the foundation of Antinoopolis makes particular sense from the perspective of strategic, administrative, and geographical considerations of the Roman authorities. With Antinoopolis, a regional checkpoint for trade, administration, and the military was established, which comprised both Middle Egypt and the north of the Thebaid. Through the Via Nova Hadriana, the longest road in the province leading from Antinoopolis to Berenice on the Red Sea, the quarries and various Roman forts in the eastern desert could also be easily reached. For this reason, a combination of several factors can be assumed to explain why Antinoopolis was built in the vicinity of Hermopolis. The death of Antinous may therefore have been a useful coincidence for the foundation, but it was certainly not the main reason. But how exactly is the construction of the city to be imagined? The official date of the city's foundation is the 30th October 130 AD. The construction of the city was then formally started relatively soon thereafter. The first competitions in honor of the deified Antinous, the so-called Megala Antinoea, are already documented for the year 131. Then, the first evidence of an Antinoid citizen is also dated to this year. In May 131, there you have this, a register here in the Fayum of property mentions a certain Gaius Antestius Petronianus. With this name, that is Roman and points to a military veteran, the lines of development of the colonization policy for the new city are already marked out. From the beginning, the new citizens of Antinoopolis comprised a decidedly upscale social class, which, at least in Ptolemais Hermiou, was drawn by lot, as this papyrus from Würzburg shows. Here, a certain Demetrios, who was one of the Antinous settlers and was chosen by lot, had complained about the way the local authorities treated his family in his old hometown, since he is gone. It was then declared by the authorities that his family members, as well as the ones from all the others that came as colonists to Antinoopolis, should live in the nome without disturbances. Looking at the evidence as a whole, the new polis drew its settlers from 4 sources. As in this case, the colonists were drawn from the already existing polis Ptolemais. They were taken from former Greek settlers of the Fayum, came from the metropolis of the nomes, and were composed of veterans of the Roman army, like the already mentioned Gaius Antestius Petronianus. The citizens of Antinoopolis were thus a very heterogeneous group that included Roman citizens as well as polis citizens from Ptolemais or Egyptians formerly belonging to the capitals of the administrative districts. They were apparently recruited from all over the province and, as our evidence makes clear, all too often stayed at their old hometowns without moving permanently to Antinoopolis. Hadrian, therefore, endowed the new settlers with a number of privileges, which above all were supposed to make settling in Antinoopolis more attractive. Of the documented privileges that I list here, many related to benefits in Antinoopolis, such as exemptions from customs duties or an alimentation fund for newborn children. In this regard, every Antinous citizen who registered his children within the first 10 days after birth, before the town council, was allowed to receive a share of the fund. The short period of time after the birth, however, made a stay in Antinoopolis indispensable, since the discomfort of a journey in a heavily pregnant state or even with a newborn child would have been meant a risk to life and limb for the mother and the child. Anyone who wanted a share of the Hadrianic alimentary fund thus inevitably had to stay in the city for a certain period of time. The privilege of customs could then guarantee the reliability of supply for the population. In addition to relying on local agriculture, purchases from other parts of the country should be considered, as it is also assumed for the Dakhla oasis in southern Egypt. In such a context, the Antinous customs privilege led to an easier flow of goods in the long run and possibly even to an increased volume of marine traffic. Other privileges supported Antinous and their family members who were put under pressure by the local authorities outside of the new polis concerning, for example, acceptance of liturgies, that means actions for the community, or the right to transfer all legal conflicts to Antinoopolis, where the Roman authorities might rather judge in favor of the Antinous. It can be shown that not only the recruitment of settlers took several years, but also the granting of privileges did not take place immediately after the foundation, but it was a successive reaction to emerging problems of settlement. Accounts of the construction of the theater in 138 AD or the design of the Kaisareion in the 150s also show that Antinoopolis was a construction site for a considerable time. Thus, the city does not appear to have been truly functional until some time after its foundation, although political activity probably began as early as the 130s. The fact that the city was able to establish itself in the long run is mainly due to the care of the Roman authorities. With the moment of the enlistment of new settlers for Antinoopolis and the successive granting of privileges, individuals from the Egyptian Chora were singled out as something special from the rest of the community. For this reason, they were apparently repeatedly exposed to the displeasure of their former peers. The foundation of Antinoopolis obviously affected the central places of the province, everywhere settlers for the new foundation were selected. The majority of the papyri tell us about the misunderstandings of the privileges or about dispute over the proper execution of the rites between nome officials and these new Antinous. This is an example from the 3rd century AD that has exemplary value. Here, Antinous who lived in Oxyrhynchus complain about the ignorance of their rites by the official Aurelius Serapion. In the previous cycle of the persons about to serve in the quarters of the city, it is said, the Amphotogrammateus then in office, Aurelius Serapion, ignoring our rights, in the list of burdens submitted by him returned us for collection of money taxes in the metropolis, and we immediately on receiving information of it did not acquiesce but applied to the most high town council recounting the audacity and illegality of the said Amphotogrammateus. The town council was indignant and sent to the most high epistrategos, directing that the amphotogrammatores should be compelled either to present some other person instead of us for the office or to pay the penalty for his illegality. According to this and many other documents, the Antinooids occasionally had problems getting their privileged rights. In the epistrategos, however, a higher Roman magistrate, they found an official who spoke up for their rights. In this respect, the Antinooids enjoyed the special care of the Roman authorities, but this was not limited to the population of the new city. Other factors were the funding for the construction of Antinoopolis and its major cult for Antinous that came along with cultic games, the so-called Megala Antinouia. From an ostracon from Elephantine, we learn that the establishment of the cult was connected with a tax that seems to have been levied on the entire province. The construction of the tomb of Antinous and the associated sanctuary at Antinoopolis was thus financed, at least to some extent, from the revenues of the province. The same apparently happened with the annual Megala Antinouia, as suggested by a papyrus from Oxyrhynchus, which provides information about the provision of cattle for these festivals. A papyrus from the Fayum also gives us the following information. Here, Nemesion, son of Apollonius, and Antestios, son of Demetrius, and the other Epimeletes, that means providers, of the theatres in Antinoopolis, greet Pausiris, son of Atreus, a sailor of the village Anchiris in the Heracleopolite nome. They confirm him that he has brought to the mentioned site on behalf of Hieron, son of Pisoitos, sailor of the same village Anchiris, and also on behalf of Papontos, son of Amois, elder of the hamlet of Dositheus in the Oxyrhynchite nome, and on behalf of the same hamlet of Dositheus, the load of chaff. In this document, a committee of Antinooid citizens responsible for the construction of the theatre in Antinoopolis is in contact with a sailor from the Heracleopolites, a nome north of the new polis. The Antinooid citizens are supplied here with chaff for the work on the theatre. The text clearly shows that people from different nomes were involved in the construction of the theatre of Antinoopolis. However, as the note on the collection of chaff from different villages suggests, they had to contribute taxes, so their involvement was not part of a transaction between equal partners. The tax for the cult of Antinous, the levy of cattle from Oxyrhynchus for the athletic games, and this last document in connection with the construction of the theatre of Antinoopolis thus show that other regions of Egypt were forcibly involved in the construction and establishment of Antinoopolis as a self-sufficient settlement in the 2nd century. The province as a whole thus contributed to a certain degree to the functioning of the newly founded city. This special treatment of Antinoopolis had consequences for the other polis of Egypt as well. When establishing Egypt as a province, the Romans created new categories of classification amongst the population, which were primarily based on fiscal standards. Thus, the citizens of the polis were completely exempt from the poll tax compared to the inhabitants of the nome capitals as well as the rural population, so that in this aspect they were in a privileged position within the provincial population. However, this circumstance did not change the fact that the Romans declared all inhabitants of the province to be Egyptians across the board. The new rulers distinguished only between Alexandrians and the rest of the population. The citizens of Naucratis and Ptolemais Hermiou, however, were thus in a sense denied their Hellenitas despite their fiscal privileges. Among the Egyptians, they occupied an outstanding fiscal position. However, they did not receive any privileges comparable to those of Alexandria. Moreover, they still saw themselves as Greek, as this private epigram from Ptolemais illustrates. To Isis Carpotokos, I, Celsus, have dedicated this inscription in order to remember my wife, my children, and my sweet home Ptolemais that Soter founded, a holy district of the Greeks made by the Nile. In this epigram, the dedicator explicitly refers to Ptolemy I and the Greekness of his hometown. The people of Ptolemais therefore really thought of themselves as different from the other towns of the Hira and were proud of their city. The Romans, however, clearly did not share this view. In this respect, the foundation of Antinoopolis had to signify a snub for the already established polis. Here, in the midst of the Egyptian Shura, a new body of people was constituted, which was endowed with a series of privileges that far exceeded the rights of the other polis. To make matters worse, the new foundation was embedded by the Romans in an interpretative framework that made it stand out from the province like Alexandria. As Josef Mélès-Mojejewski aptly puts it, the creation of an alliance of new Hellenes in fact basically implies the absence of the old. With the Antinooids, the Romans thus in a way created a group of Greeks in the province that had apparently no longer existed locally in this form. For this reason, it seems to be no coincidence that the inscribed copy of a much older tribute by the citizens of Ptolemais Hermiou to Ptolemy I, the founder of their city, is preserved from the 2nd century, which reads as follows. It was decided by council and moot, due to the fact that King Ptolemy I, the god, the savior, founded a Greek polis in the Thebaid, which he named Ptolemais, depending on his own name, and then he chose settlers from Argos and Thessaly, and it may be decided by the council and the moot according to the city law. Here, we face a resolution from Ptolemaic times that honors King Ptolemy I, first foundation of Ptolemais Hermiou. In its wording, the character of Ptolemais Hermiou as a Greek polis is emphasized here, as is the origin of the settlers from Greek cities and regions, such as Argos or Thessaly. The citizens of Ptolemais Hermiou thus actively propagated their own origins and passed with this text. Like Antinoopolis, their city went back to the founding act of a ruler, and like the Antinooid New Hellenes, they too had Greek roots. In the light of this testimony, however, the constitution of a group of New Hellenes can only be seen as a clear offense against the citizens of Ptolemais Hermiou, but certainly also Naucratis. From the Roman perspective, there was only one polis within the Egyptian Shura in the 2nd century that could be understood as Greek, and that was Antinoopolis. But the new city was also a challenge for Alexandria. In a way, its construction seems like a deliberate confrontation between Hadrian and the tradition of Alexander the Great. Not only had Alexander the Great also founded a polis in Egypt with which the new settlement could now compete, the idealization of Antinoopolis as a memorial foundation for the deceased favorite of the ruler was also reminiscent of comparable cities such as Alexandria Bukephalos in India, which had been founded in honor of Alexander's deceased horse. Menandretor, a rhetorician of the 3rd century AD, explicitly mentions both cities in the same breath. Hadrian's relationship with Antinous was reminiscent of familiar companions such as Achilles and Patroclus, but also Alexander and Hephaestion. Clement of Alexandria explicitly compares their relationship with that of Zeus to Ganymede, who abducted the boy to Mount Olympus and kept him as his cupbearer. In view of these ideas, Antinoopolis takes on the character of a new Alexandria in the Egyptian hinterland. For even only the inhabitants of these two cities had special privileges in the Egyptian province. In their quantity, however, the privileges granted to the Antinooids clearly outweighed those of the Alexandrians. The sheer number of 15 currently identified special privileges thus not only placed the Antinooids on an equal footing with the Alexandrians, but even elevated them above them. In particular, the granting of a town council to Antinoopolis clearly shows the privileged position of the new foundation compared to Alexandria. Despite several requests to the Roman rulers, the latter had to do without a town council until the reign of Septimius Severus and was therefore not a truly autonomous polis. The city's autonomy was thus severely impaired by the Roman central authorities, and its urban self-image was downright humiliated. Thus, Alexandria did not receive the decisive organ of urban self-government until about 70 years after Antinoopolis. From 130 onwards, therefore, Antinoopolis was a new, regionally prominent polis next to Alexandria in the Egyptian Shura. The granting of privileges to this city clearly illustrates Hadrian's effort to establish it as an important major city in the province. For the rest of the 2nd century, Antinoopolis remained superior to Alexandria in this respect. It was a polis both in name and in legal character. This, however, made Antinoopolis basically the only true polis in the entire province at that time. Neither the capitals of the individual nomes nor the three other polis had anything like the status of Hadrian's foundation. A change only occurred here in the 3rd century with the granting of town councils to Alexandria and the other central places of Egypt. Now a competition developed that even Antinoopolis could no longer escape, and which in the long run reduced the differences between Antinoopolis and the other places. The growing self-assertion of the metropoles and the attempt to align themselves with the polis of Egypt that started with the introduction of the town councils had the effect of diminishing the prominent position of Antinoopolis in the course of the 3rd century. Although the Emperor Gordian III confirmed the privileges of the Antinous citizens in 241–42 AD, the majority of these sooner or later became superfluous. Thus, neither the town council nor athletic competitions were any longer a special feature that Antinoopolis alone possessed. The neighboring city of Hermopolis, for example, introduced athletic competitions immediately after gaining the right to a town council, as did Oxyrhynchus or Leontopolis in the Delta. As in Antinoopolis, there is also evidence of the city's right of first purchase in the case that someone could not pay his debts anymore, the so-called protopraxia. And both in Hermopolis and in Oxyrhynchus, there were regular grain distributions since the second half of the 3rd century. A number of privileges of Antinoopolis were thus relativized because the metropoles of Egypt also aimed for them. The situation was different with Antinous privileges that lost their meaning in the course of empire-wide developments or as a result of specific actions by the emperors. For example, the right of marriage for Antinous citizens became basically obsolete after the general granting of Roman citizenship in 212 AD. This privilege had originally legitimized above all the marriage of Antinous citizens with persons from the leading class of the metropolis, and that was probably introduced to further populate Antinoopolis. However, since now all the metropolitans had Roman citizenship themselves, a special legal status for the Antinous became unnecessary. In 245 AD, moreover, the poll tax fell so that the Antinous citizens were no longer special in this respect either. Nevertheless, it seems that the Antinous citizens continued to be exempt from liturgies until the second half of the 3rd century, possibly even until Diocletian's reforms. In the 3rd century, however, other groups such as athletes from the nome capitals benefited from this privilege as well. In the neighboring city of Hermopolis, for example, there were quite a number of privileged elites in this respect, so that in this place a not inconsiderable number had the same status as the Antinous citizens. Overall, several of the privileges were thus relativized in the course of the 3rd century. In fact, during the early reign of Diocletian, there was apparently nothing that really distinguished Antinoopolis from other cities in the province, and only its upgrade to become the capital of the newly founded province of the Thebaid changed this development. In late antiquity, Antinoopolis was once again the most important city of Middle Egypt. I leave it at that and come to a conclusion. I wanted to give you an impression of what significance the foundation of Antinoopolis might have had on the Egyptian Hurrah. Because of the name of the Antinous as New Greeks, a dichotomy was created by the Romans between them and the people from the other towns of the province. However, this dichotomy, as we've seen, can by no means be characterized between Greeks and Egyptians in an ethnic sense, as sometimes researchers still argue. Rather, in Roman times, we're dealing with different legal categories. The Antinous citizens of the first generation in particular came to a large extent from the same social environment as the local elites of the nome. However, they differed from them significantly in their status as citizens of the polis Antinoopolis. Since the new settlers apparently did not completely transfer their residence to Antinoopolis for several generations, the inhabitants in the old hometowns were always confronted with the special rights of the colonists. People who were basically no different from them were suddenly called New Hellenes and had privileges. This not only caused tensions between Antinous citizens and the authorities in the old hometowns, but the elites of these places also perceived exactly what characterized Antinoopolis and its citizens in particular. As soon as the metropoles were granted a certain autonomy by Septimius Severus at the beginning of the 3rd century, they used the new opportunities to actively compete with Antinoopolis, as Hermopolis, Oxyrhynchus, or Leontopolis did. Furthermore, already in the 2nd century, the three polis of Egypt, Alexandria, Naucratis, and Ptolemais Hermiou, must have felt the competition with the new foundation. In Antinoopolis, a new major imperial center for the region was emerging. I believe this as one aspect why Antinoopolis could develop alongside the long-established Hermopolis. Its focus as city of imperial administration and presence stood in no conflict to the fields Hermopolis was locally filling. Thus, it is by no means an attempt at Hellenization imposed on the province by the Romans, as alluded to at the beginning of the presentation, that constitutes Antinoopolis. Rather, as a settlement, it was placed by the Romans in a position that had to make Antinoopolis a model worthy of imitation and envy for all those who were dissatisfied with the merely quasi-urban state of their hometowns or the ignorance of the Roman authorities towards the Greek self-awareness. In the competition to match Antinoopolis, the polis gradually lost its special rights. In the end, however, Antinoopolis won the interurban contest when it was chosen as the seat of the praeses of the Thebaid. Antinoopolis can be counted as one of the last colonies that were founded in the High Roman Empire. The reason for that are the same problems as we can see at other colonies. A lot of settlers were unwilling to transfer their center of life to the new place. Thus, the privileges Hadrian gave to the Antinooids were thought as a stimulus to move the people to settle in the new foundation. When the people did not move, the authorities of the old nomes had to deal with these new privileges in a constant dispute. Furthermore, the towns of the Jura were forced to help at the erection of the new city. For this reason, the foundation of Antinoopolis was an event that had an effect on the whole province. The implicit and explicit effects of this new city foundation in 130 can therefore hardly be underestimated. Thank you very much for your attention.